You know, the Rat, Pac Frank Sinatra, DeanMartin, Sammy Davis Jr., they were the kings of cool in Las Vegas. Their shows were legendary, packed with music, comedy, and that effortless charm. But what a lot of people don't realize is that Vegas back then was a different world. It was a city practically built and run by the mob, and when you worked in their casinos, you played by their rules. This proximity, too powerful and often dangerous, meant that even stars as big as the Rat Pack had to tread carefully. One wrong move, one misunderstood joke, and things could get very serious very fast. Frank Sinatra, with his well-known connections, seemed to navigate this world with a certain level of understanding. But DeanMartin, he was a different story. Dean just wanted to sing, tell a few jokes, have a drink, and go home. He wasn't interested in the politics or the power plays of the underworld. But one night, that underworld came crashing onto his stage, putting him face to face with a situation that could have ended his career or worse. The year was 1965. DeanMartin was at the peak of his fame, headlining at the Sands Hotel and Casino in Vegas. The Sands was iconic, the epicenter of Rat Pack glamour, but it was also controlled by some very influential and dangerous figures. One of these figures was a notorious mobster named Anthony Tony Spilatro. Now, Spilatro wasn't just some low-level thug. He was the Chicago Outfit's enforcer in Las Vegas, known for his brutal efficiency and a temper that was as short as it was violent. His job was to protect the mob's casino interests, and he did it with an iron fist. Everyone in Vegas, from the dealers to the entertainers, knew who Tony Spilatro was and knew to stay on his good side. He was the kind of guy who didn't need to raise his voice to be intimidating. His reputation did all the talking for him. He was even the inspiration for Joe Pesci's character, Nicky Santoro, in the movie Casino. That should give you an idea of the kind of man we're talking about. So, picture this. DeanMartin is on stage, drink in hand, doing what he does best. He's crooning a classic, Maybe Ain't That a Kick in the Head, and bantering with the audience. The crowd is loving it. This was the classic DeanMartin persona, the suave, slightly tipsy, utterly charming entertainer. He had this incredible ability to make a massive showroom feel like an intimate living room. He'd ad-lib, poke fun at his bandmates, and even at himself. Part of his act involved pretending to be a bit drunk, slurring his words just so, and making jokes about his love for booze. It was all a carefully crafted performance, of course. In reality, what was in his glass on stage was often just apple juice, but the audience bought it, and it was a huge part of his appeal. He was the lovable rogue, the guy everyone wanted to have a drink with. On this particular night, the show was going perfectly. The jokes were landing, the songs were smooth, and the energy was electric. Everything was exactly as it should be. Suddenly, from the audience, a voice cuts through the applause. It's loud, abrasive, and full of menace. A man stands up and starts heckling Dean. This wasn't your usual tipsy tourist shouting, "I love you, Dino." This was different. The man was aggressive, his words dripping with contempt. He started yelling insults, telling Dean he wasn't funny, that he was a hack. The mood in the room shifted instantly. The laughter died down, replaced by a tense, uncomfortable silence. The audience members near the man nervously looked away, trying to become invisible. The band faltered for a moment. All eyes were on Dean. How would he handle this? Hecklers were a part of the job, but this felt more sinister. And who was this guy, brazen enough to disrupt a DeanMartin show in a Marlborough casino? It was none other than Tony Spilotro. He was there with his crew, and for whatever reason, he'd decided to make DeanMartin his target. Now, everyone in that room who knew who Spilotro was held their breath. This wasn't just a heckler. This was a death sentence in a tailored suit. Disrespecting a man like Spilotro, even unintentionally, could have dire consequences. Security guards who would normally handle a heckler were frozen, knowing full well who they'd be up against. This was their boss's boss. The power dynamic in the room was completely upended. Tony Spilotro was now the one in control, and he was making a public spectacle of humiliating one of the biggest stars in the world. He continued his verbal assault, his voice echoing in the no-silent showroom. He called Dean a dago, a wop, and other ethnic slurs, trying to provoke a reaction. He was testing him, seeing how far he could push him in front of this packed house. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. DeanMartin was standing on a brightly lit stage, but he had never been in a darker or more dangerous spot. Most performers would have crumbled. They might have tried to insult the heckler back, which would have been a fatal mistake. They might have called for security, which would have been useless. Or they might have just walked off stage, defeated. But DeanMartin wasn't most performers. He stood there calmly listening to the barrage of insults. He didn't flinch. He just took a slow sip from his glass, that signature cool, never leaving his face. He let Spilotro completely finish his tirade. He let the silence hang in the air for a moment longer, drawing all the focus back to himself. The entire audience and Spilotro himself were waiting to see what he would do next. It was a moment of pure high-stakes drama. This was a man whose career was built on being likable and in control, and now a powerful mobster was trying to strip him of both publicly. Dean's entire life had been a performance, but this was the most important one he would ever give. Then, with perfect comedic timing, DeanMartin lowered his microphone slightly, leaned forward, and spoke in a calm, almost gentle voice. He looked directly at Tony Spilotro and said, "Sir, I feel so sorry for you." He paused, letting the words sink in. The audience was stunned. Spilotro was stunned. Dean continued, "I get paid a lot of money to stand up here and be a professional." He then gestured around the luxurious showroom. "You paid a lot of money to come in here and act like an amateur." And then came the masterstroke. Dean looked at the casino boss who was sitting with Spilotro, a man named Carl Cohen, and said, "Carl, give this gentleman his money back and get him out of here. He obviously doesn't want to be here, and we don't want him here." It was pure genius. He didn't insult Spilotro, he didn't engage in a fight. He pitied him. He turned Spilotro's attempt at humiliation into an act of pathetic desperation. The entire room was silent for a beat, and then erupted into a massive wave of applause and laughter. The tension shattered. DeanMartin had won it. He hadn't just handled a heckler, he had verbally disarmed one of the most feared men in Las Vegas without throwing a single punch or insult. He used his wit and his stage persona as a shield and a weapon. He didn't stoop to Spilotro's level. Instead, he elevated himself, reinforcing his status as the consummate professional. He had exposed Spilotro not as a powerful mobster, but as a classless loudmouth who didn't know how to behave in a nightclub. Spilotro, utterly deflated and publicly embarrassed, had no choice. He and his crew, red-faced and furious, were escorted out of the showroom as the audience cheered. He had come to make a point, but DeanMartin had made a much bigger one. The aftermath of this incident is just as telling. You might think that publicly embarrassing a man like Tony Spilotro would be a death wish. But DeanMartin's response was so brilliant that it actually earned him a strange kind of respect from the very people he had stood up to. The mob bosses understood power, and Dean had just demonstrated a different kind of power, the power of wit, composure, and unshakable confidence. He hadn't shown fear, which they respected. He hadn't been disrespectful in a thuggish way. He had been clever. He had played their game of power and intimidation on his own terms, on his stage, and he had won decisively. From that night on, DeanMartin was reportedly never bothered by the mob again. He had drawn a line in the sand, and they knew not to cross it. He had proven that while they might own the casino, he owned the stage. This story perfectly encapsulates who DeanMartin was. He was more than just a crooner with a glass in his hand. He was incredibly sharp, quick-witted, and brave. He navigated a dangerous world, not with threats or violence, but with a cool head and a sharp tongue. While Frank Sinatra dealt with the mob by being one of them, DeanMartin dealt with them by being completely and unassailably himself. It's a testament to his character and his genius as a performer. It's a reminder that true strength isn't always about being the loudest or the toughest person in the room. Sometimes it's about being the smartest. DeanMartin wasn't just a king of cool, he was a master of survival. And that, my friends, is a real kick in the head. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story about a classic Hollywood legend, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the golden age of entertainment. Let me know in the comments what your favorite DeanMartin song or movie is. See you in the next one.